Hi, good morning. Welcome. My name is George Duke. I am an advisor at Enterprise Europe Network, a global network under European Innovation Council and the SME Executive Agency. And I am part of the Aerospace and Defense Sector Group team. I'm Portuguese. In Portugal, I work for the main public agency supporting small and medium-sized enterprise, the IAPMEI, which is the leader of the Enterprise Europe Network Portugal consortium. With me is Miguel Gomes, also an advisor at the AEN, who will collect your questions and put them to our speakers at the end. So, why this webinar? Because from our interactions with companies, universities, and research centers, in our support activities, it became clear to us that they were unfamiliar with the dual-use concept and the European roles of goods, service, and the technology transfers. So we invite three experts in these areas to help us better understand. They are Gonçalo Grade, Maria Oliveira, and Johan Evans. So I'm going to read a brief CV for our guests that you can get to know them a little better. So Gonçalo Grade, graduates in law from the Faculty of Law of the University of Lisbon. Obtained a master's degree in business law from University Institute of Lisbon and wrote a thesis in tax law. Also holds a postmaster's degree in European custom law from University of Rotterdam, where he completed a thesis of export control. He was a lawyer. He served as a legal advisor to Minister of Finance in the 21st and 22nd Portuguese constitutional governments. Since 2020, he has served as customs and tax advisors at permanent representation of Portugal to the European Union in Brussels. Thank you, Gonçalo. Mrs. Maria Oliveira. Maria is a senior customs and license office at the License Department of Portuguese Customs and Tax Administrations. Since 2005, he has specialized in strategic trades control, commercial restrictions, and sanctions. She serves at the Portuguese delegate to the European Commission's Dual-Use Coordinating Group and Assistant Delegate to EU Council's Dual-Use Working Party. She has also participated in Portuguese missions to the Financial Actions Task Force and currently collaborates with the EU P2P program on capacity building for dual-use export controls in third countries. Our other guest is Johan Evers. Is currently the technical coordinator export control, sanctions, security and defense and knowledge security at IMEC, a world-leading semiconductors research center based in Belgium. Previously, Johan served as a technical export control analyst at the Department of Chancellery of Foreign Affairs of the Flemish government. He was also seconded to the European Commission's Directorate General for Trade, where he chaired the working group of EU industry compliance guidance for dual-use export controls, and he co-chaired the working group on EU compliance guidance for research involved dual-use items. Johan began his career at the Flemish Parliament, where he managed projects related to knowledge-based policy-making on emerging and disruptive technology. He holds a PhD in bioscience engineering from KU Leuven, Belgium. Thank you to the guest. It is an honor for us. Thanks everyone present. And so let's beginning. Gonçalo, the stage, it's yours.
Thank you, George. Good morning to everyone. Let me start by sharing my screen. I guess you can see now my screen, okay. So first of all, I'd like to quickly thank IAPMEI and Enterprise Europe Network for organizing this webinar, and in particular Jorge Silva Duque and Miguel Gomes for their openness and willingness to address the topic of export controls and dual-use goods, specifically the case of technology transfer aimed at science and technology institutions. Our goal, despite the time constraints of this webinar, is to raise awareness about this issue and provide some tools that will, we hope, enables you to navigate the technicalities and the complexities associated with the transfer of dual-use technologies more comfortably. We recognize that this topic can be challenging at times, so we hope that our comments and explanations will prove to be helpful. Export of dual-use items and technology transfer in particular has been under close observation in the context of European export controls. And basically, there are three reasons for this. First, foreign economies purchase know-how in Europe for manufacturing the product instead of the product itself. Second, research is becoming, and I mean research, business and economic activities in general are more and more digital. So every university or science or technology institution uses digital media for its internal communication or communication with fellow researchers via emails or the installation of servers for electronic access from abroad. Further, I mean, in international projects, the electronic exchange of information between partners, fellow researchers is a key factor of cooperation. And third, we have to keep in mind that certain sensitive countries and organizations continue to seek to obtain sensitive items and information to develop their programs or to maintain their weapons arsenal. So governments are more aware of this reality and more concerned about the evasion of export controls. And on top of that, more recently, and I think we all have the feeling that export controls have replaced tariffs as the real frontier of power. I mean, just think about the latest news on Chinese export controls regime. So therefore, it's a matter that requires attention, and it's completely under the radar. So I think we should start by trying to understand what is an export control, try to give some sort of overview. So an export control refers to several laws and regulations that have a common objective to prevent the transfer of certain tangible or intangible goods for reasons of national or international security, unless specific authorization, what we call export license, is granted by competent authorities. And export controls aim to balance the facilitation of legitimate trade with the need to safeguard national and international security interests. So export controls are regulatory measures applied to monitor and control the export of certain items, technologies, and services. And these controls are designed to ensure that exports do not contribute to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, support terrorism, endanger national security or foreign policy interests, and the protection of human rights. They also ensure compliance with international obligations and agreements, which are one of the bases for export controls and the control lists that are most often associated with these export controls. And knowing what an export control is and the importance of an export control, it's also important to understand the consequences if we export without alliances. Export controls are mandatory, which means that it is not possible to diverge from these decisions through contractual clauses, for example, Incoterms. And an infringement of these laws is an infringement of public policy decisions. And as you can understand, as a result, penalties or penalties for violations of export control laws and regulations can be impactful and can be civil and or criminal. But most important, your reputation and the reputation of your institution could be serious damage if these regulations are not followed. So we intend to help you or try to help you on how to identify, manage, and mitigate risks associated with dual-use export controls, and to facilitate the compliance with the relevant EU laws and regulations. Our approach, or what we want, is that export controls to be a seamless part of your organization and not a hindrance. I mean, the aim is for you to carry out your activities without hindrance at all. So we want you to be successful in your activities, and we believe that in order to do that, you have to be aware of these export controls that might be applied to you. Why this webinar is aimed at science and technology institutions. Dual-use export controls exist to govern activities involving items such materials, equipment, software, technologies, which can be used for both civil and military purposes, and possibly associated with the creation of conventional military items or the proliferation of nuclear, radiological, chemical, biological weapons, I mean, also known as weapons of mass destruction, and their delivery systems, such as missiles or drones. In addition, these controls may be complemented with national measures for non-listed dual-use items for public security or human rights concerns. But dual-use export controls pose specific challenges for research organizations connected to the importance of sharing research results, together with the publish or perish imperative in the research ecosystem. So raising awareness about these controls is an important aspect of preventing and mitigating risks related to non-compliance. That said, as we will see later on, it's important to highlight that many research activities performed by research organizations are not subject to dual-use export control scrutiny. Firstly, because such research does not relate to any of the items on the EU dual-use list. And secondly, because the research does not specifically deal with technology for the development or the production or use that is responsible for achieving or extending the control performance levels or functions in the EU dual use list. So fear not, not all research technology transfer is under dual use export control scrutiny, but it is important, and I would like to highlight this, to understand what is in fact under scrutiny. The aim of export controls and license authorities is not to censor scientific research or their output. The aim is to prevent security-related abuse when sensitive goods or knowledge are transferred abroad. And in fact, in these efforts, the EU Commission has also published guidance for research organizations to assist with compliance of export control obligations, governing research activities involving dual-use items. As a curiosity, I think it's important to share with you the team dual-use tool or platform, because this team dual use, you can find it if you search by team dual use. You will be directed to the Commission website, and this team dual use tool is a tool to track possible dual use relevance of research and innovation results. This tool allows to navigate through millions of scientific papers and find how research organizations may have produced results with potential dual-use applications. So keep in mind that export controls do not apply only to goods, but also to knowledge and data contained in research results. For research entities in particular, this tool enables you to assessing the past scientific production to identify articles, patents, or EU-funded project results already produced and published, which could have had potential dual-use content, and also identifying areas for targeted awareness raising activities to reinforce internal compliance. And basically, when you see all these lines, the thicker the line, the more, research connecting these two dots you will find. And the thicker the line is, the more research involving researchers from both, in this case, the EU and the United States. The thicker the line are, the most research between researchers from these two countries. The thicker the line is, the more research involving the researchers from these two countries you will get. So it's quite a useful tool to understand how research entities or institutions cooperate with others and the level of cooperation, and on that cooperation, how many of those research can have dual-use applications. So keep an eye on it. Try to be brief on this. It's important to understand the EU export controls regime, or the ecosystem, and how we get there in a way. So this slide, it seeks to explain how various elements at various levels interact, contributing to what we understand as the EU export control regime. So first, we have the international standards, like international treaties and conventions, and export control regimes. and export control regimes where participating countries agree on managing the import or export and transit of certain items. So in international standards, you have like the Biological Weapons Convention, the Chemical Weapons Convention, the United Nations Security Council Regulation 1540, but also the multilateral export control regimes like the Australian Group, the Wassenaar Arrangement, very important on dual-use items. Also the Missile Technology Control Regime or the Nuclear Suppliers Group. And then you have EU controls, such as Regulation 250 from 2012, that puts in place measures to enforce Article 10 of the United Nations Protocol against the illicit manufacturing and traffic of firearms. You also have Regulation 125 from 2019 that addresses the trade in certain items that could be used for capital punishment, torture, or other cruel and inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment. And I mean, you have several controls under this umbrella, but more importantly for our discussion, our beloved Regulation A21 from 2021, known as the dual-use regulation, that establishes rules on export controls for dual-use items applicable to all EU member states. You also have national controls under this control part, and then you have sanctions. And most sanctions adopted by the EU are targeted at individuals and entities, and consists of assets freeze, travel bans, and the prohibition to make funds and economic resources available to listed entities or individual. And actually, this is a main difference between sanctions and controls. Controls are more broader, and sanctions are specifically targeted to individual or entities. The controls is about items, so they are not individually targeted to specific people or entities. So, I mean, international conventions, treaties, the multilateral export control regimes paves the way for Regulation 821 from 2021. And as I said, this regulation establishes a union regime for the control of exports, brokering, technical assistance, transit, and transfer of dual-use items. An important part of our dual-use export control regimes, but in most regimes, are the control lists. So lists of control items are essential tools for exporters to ensure compliance with export controls. Controls typically require exporters to obtain prior authorization to export designated items to certain countries, and in some circumstances, in case of the EU framework, also within Europe. So control lists are, I mean, the backbone of control export regimes, but they don't fall from the sky. So during the discussion of the control list or about the items that should be put on the list, there are several elements that countries take in consideration, like the practicality of implementing controls, or the availability of that specific item or technology. Because if it's, I mean, broadly available, perhaps it doesn't make sense to control it. So all these elements that you can see in the slide, these four elements are taken into consideration when we discuss the items and the control lists. When we discuss dual use items and dual use controls, it's important to ask, or 4 questions can be made: what, why, who, and how. I will focus on the first 2, and then Maria will follow.
1 minute, Gonçalo.
Okay.
Okay.
So what is a dual use item? I mean, more or less, I think you are aware of this. The definition, you can find it on Article 2 of the EU regulation, refers to products and components, including software and technology, which can be used for both civil and military purposes, and includes items that can be used for the design, development, production, or use of weapons, nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons, or the means of delivery. Following this definition, export controls may apply to both physical and non-physical items, and transfers of information or technology related to control items are themselves control. So what is technology and technology controls? Technology controls exist to ensure that knowledge, know-how, and expertise related to sensitive items are not inadvertently supplied for use in programs with military or WMD, public security, or human rights concerns. And while some data is rather innocuous, other can also serve as part of someone's toolkit to accelerate the development of weapons. The same regulation defines technology as a specific information necessary for the development, production, or use of goods. So development, production, operation, installation, maintenance, repair, overhaul, or refurbishing of a product. And this information takes the form of technical data or technical assistance. This means that in order to be classified as listed dual-use technology, the technical data or technical assistance must contain specific information necessary for the development, production, or use of the goods. So the reference to specific information is intended to focus the technology control on that part of the technology that makes an item meet or exceed the listed perform thresholds. In the regulation and in annexes, you also find a reference to required. And the definition of required is to focus the technology controls on the specific technology that makes an item subject to a license, that makes a technology peculiarly responsible for achieving, developing a control item or extending the control performance level characteristics or functions from dual-use control lists. And on top of that, technical assistance means any technical support related to repairs, development, manufacture, assembly, testing, maintenance, or any other technical service, and may take forms such as instruction, advice, training, the transmission of working knowledge or skills, or consulting services, including by electronic means, like telephone, verbal forms of assistance, means that transfer of intangible knowledge. And I'm finishing here. You have some examples of technical data and technical assistance, how can materialize in a way. And to finish, and connected with what is dual use item is when do we need authorization, or when do we need export licenses? An export licenses is required for the export of a product and or technology related to a product outside the European Union. So export in this case represents any transfer considered in every broad way, any oral, written, electronic, or visual disclosure, any shipment, transfer, or transmission of products, technology, information, technical data, software, codes, assistance, any publication, cloud computing, so you name it. And with electronic transfers, more than a transfer, I think keep in mind making it available. I think it's a good reference to how to understand this. So basically, this is an overview and bring us to the concept of technology transfer under European export controls. So I mean, software and technology can take the form of tangible or intangible ways, but also technology transfer is carried out via technical assistance in the right, and can also can have or can be transferred in several ways. And then why we have controls, I already explained a little bit. It's concerns about the possible end use of items related to the proliferation of conventional weapons and weapons of mass destruction or delivery systems. And there is a lot of objectives as a reasoning to do that. Already addressed several of them, but this slide is a way to summarize it. So thank you. I tried to be as quick as possible, and now I will give the floor to Maria.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning. I will try to share my screen now. Bear with me just a little bit. Okay. Okay, so after this presentation of Gonçalo on the first main questions, the what and the how do we control dual-use items, not only the physical ones, the tangible ones, but also the intangible transfers and all the items that the technology or software that might be related with dual-use items. There's the question, who controls it? And bear in mind that when I refer to the word control, I'm not referring to an actual control. The control is made through a license. We will see later how this control is performed. But the main actors here at the framework of export controls are the licensing agencies. Sometimes they are settled under the Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Economy. Sometimes they are settled under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And sometimes they are also settled on the Ministry of Finance, like in Portugal, where the licensing agency is under the Tax and Customs Administration. But actually, who should control the transfer of the export or the trade of dual-use items and technology related should be all of us. This is a coordinated effort to control. So we need to cooperate with industry because they are also subject to export controls related with regular trade of dual-use items, but also the academia and research institutes, and also financial institutions, because the financing related with the research or with the transfer of certain technologies related with dual-use items might pose some questions concerning the end use they might be given, and also some brokers and freight forwarders. And how is this control? Gonçalo already made a hint on this. Under the European Union framework, export controls are regulated under the regulation 2021/821 that lays down the Union regime for export controls, brokering, transit, and very specific transfers and technical assistance of dual-use items. And we also have the controls that are then laid down nationally, meaning that each member state has their own legislation developing the penalties for the infringements of the regulation, or applying the implementation measures related with the issuance of the license, the reporting from the exporters or from the research institutions that have license related with dual use. So this is the framework. Please bear in mind that the regulation applies on each member state as if it was a national legislation. So you cannot separate the regulation from your national legislation on dual-use export controls, because the main legislation is the regulation, and then you have developing legislations or bylaws, regulations, that are implementing several provisions of the regulation according to the discretionality of each member state. So under the regulation, we have three sets of dual-use items. We have the ones that are listed in Annex 1 of the regulation. It's the core lists. And then you have two other sets of dual-use items that might be controlled. And I use the word might be controlled because they depend on certain conditions. So you have the catch-all provision, which states basically that certain non-listed dual-use items or technology can be controlled according the end use or the end user of these items of or technologies. So this is a sort of a catch-all clause that gathers everything that is around the dual-use sector, not related with items listed, but might be related with certain items that are listed, but they don't have the technical specifications laid down on the annex. For instance, if you have a control for drones that have 1 hour autonomy of flight, a catch-all provision can be applicable to the export of drones that have, for instance, 40 minutes of autonomy of flight, meaning that depending on the end use or the end user. For instance, for the Russia regulation on sanctions, we have certain controls on drones that don't feed the parameters of Annex 1. So the catch-all is applicable, might be applicable to any other item according to the end use or the end user, the final user of this technology or item. And then you have the last set of conditions for licensing dual-use items. That is the items related with public security or human rights consideration. And here you can have several technologies, several items, but mostly technologies related with face recognition or with forensic tools for recording conversations. So this is another set of items that don't relate specifically to non-proliferation, but relates with public security or terrorism or other human rights violations considerations. So this is the set of Annex 1. As you can see, we have 10 categories that covers a broad range of items. I will not detain myself on every one of each. It's a huge list. It has more or less 200 pages in the Portuguese version. And I encourage you, if you have projects on one of these categories, to read the correspondent category just for information and to see if anything of you that any of the research or projects that you are developing can be framed here and might need an export license or a transfer license. And I will explain briefly what it is later. So each of the categories of the dual-use Annex 1 has then sub-entries, subcategories, and they are framed according to, let's say, the process of concept and construction of a product. So we start with the finalization of the product. We have the subcategory A related with systems, equipment, and components. Then we have the test, inspection, and production equipment that is used to produce those systems, equipment, and components. Then we have the materials, which are nothing less than the prime subjects of the construction of the systems and equipment and components, the raw materials. And then you have the software and the technology related with those systems, equipment, and components. So what does this mean is that software and technology related with all these items might be controlled, and as Gonçalo very well explained, it can be related when this technology or software exists to upgrade an item to get to the technical parameters that makes him control, or that upgrades an item to fulfill these same requirements. So, as I told you before, the dual use controls are performed through license, through the licensing agencies. We have several types of license. I will not detain myself on every one of those licenses. I just want to call your attention to emphasize the license on export and on technical assistance that might be of most importance for your projects and for the research that you might be developing in the areas that can be related with dual use items. So, as Gonçalo told, and I will not detain here because it's the same slide, we have some export controlled technology. And when we say that this is the specific information necessary, it's only for the development, production, or use of dual use items. And this includes the transfer of technical data, and this transfer can be a physical transfer. You can export some technical data through a fact sheet, to a manual, to a through a book, through an USB stick. But you also can transfer this type of specific information that is necessary to product a dual use item through the cloud, through the internet, even on a phone call conversation, or when you make a conference and you explain how you achieve the results of the concept of the production for the production of a certain dual use item. And as a practical example, if you go to a conference and you explain how you build a specific drone that for him to achieve 1 hour autonomy, and if you explain how we can overcome the wind speed, for instance, for 46 kilometers an hour, if you explain this on the conference, this type of explanation is subject to an authorization, because you are really providing the necessary information for the production and for the development of the drone that makes him controlled. So, and now getting to cut the chase to the most relevant questions. So, when we speak about research and export controls, and what makes this controlled is when you use dual use items during your research, and you cooperate with entities on third countries, and you need to transfer those dual use items between your companion entity to the third country, or when you have research outputs that you will share with these entities that are on third countries, and these outputs of your research meet the technical specifications that are covered on Annex 1 that are listed. But bear in mind that not all the research that involves dual use items demands for an export authorization. So this means that we have certain exemptions or certain decontrols. There are certain activities that you perform, certain research that are not covered. So we have exemptions that are specific for a listed item in Annex 1. So for that specific listed item, you need to see if there are decontrol notes on the category itself. For instance, on the category for drones, you need to see under the category 9, that's the one that covers the drones, if there is some decontrol note specific for drones, but also, and most importantly, you have some general notes that speak about decontrols. And these general notes are found on the in the beginning of Annex 1. And you have specific notes on software and technology. And what makes this more important in my regard is that you should take in consideration that when you are transferring technology related with dual use items listed in Annex 1, there are certain topics that are not covered. So for them, you don't need an export license or a transfer license. And those are related to the basic scientific research, to the public domain information, and the information necessary to make patent applications for industrial proprietary applications. And I will explain briefly what they are. So when you speak about basic research, this refers to the experimental or theoretical work that aims to get new knowledge on fundamental principles of facts without a specific practical goal. This means that you take the basic research and you dissert on it. So you are just seeing on the fundamentals, you are just make some experiments or theoretical. You don't go beyond this fundamental research, or you don't make some applicable research under this research. Of course, this concept is not an easy definable one. You can see that is a very broad understanding, and it is written like this on the regulation. So we advise you to contact, if you have projects on dual use items, to contact the licensing authorities, or later on ECARO, to provide you some assistance and help understanding better these concepts. Also, all the publications and research that is under the public domain, meaning that is freely accessible without restrictions, that anyone can access and read, that is on open source. This is also decontrolled from the need of having an export or transfer license for dual use items. And also we have the minimum necessary information to file out a patent application. Of course, if you have to provide minimum information to get the register of your IP project, this is not also does not need also an export license. It's the minimum required. Okay, so these are the key points, and I will move a little bit more fast because we still have another speaker. These are the key points that you should retain, that what are dual use items, and why are the controls on dual use items so relevant. And then we have the legislation, where are these controls implemented, and then who are the actors, who should intervene on these controls. Bear in mind that we have several licenses, but in what matters the research, most importantly, you should focus on export and transfer authorizations, and also on the technical assistance that you can be providing. For instance, if you go to a conference and you provide not only the necessary information to build a dual use item, but as well, if you teach someone on how to repair or upgrade an already existing dual use item, be aware that your research project may involve export controls on dual use, but not all the research needs information. And concerning this, please bear in mind that there are certain key points on the general notes of the Annex 1 of the regulation that decontrol and allow you not to have an export license on research, and this is related with basic scientific research principles, the public domain, and the minimum information related with patents application. And finally, and this is just a small resume, I would like to leave you here with these pillars of export controls. You might think that this is not related with the item 5, which is technology transfers, but please bear in mind that points 1, 2, 3, 4, all these 4 pillars fit in as a glove on the technology transfers related with research application. I will not detain myself on this. It's just a question of what is control. Please be considered as well, where is your research is going, to whom you make protocols with, which type of information are you providing on your protocols related with third countries. And then why is this protocol being made with third countries? Why are the researchers from third countries so interested in your research on your technology? Why do they want to use it? And finally, be very careful who is behind this end use. When you build protocols with third countries, with another researchers institute, please be very careful with the financing from these third countries. Who are the funds providers? Are they related with certain military projects or civil fusion, military fusion projects related with the third country? So I will leave you the three pillars, and also the reference that me and Gonçalo made, especially the recommendation on internal compliance programs for research institutions on dual-use items, and the legislation, the regulation 2021-821. And here, if you have any questions, please send them to Gonçalo or to me. We provide here our LinkedIn connections, and we are fully available to answer to your questions. I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I will now pass the floor to Johan Evers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And also on behalf of we thank you for attending this this webinar. It's a pleasure for the organizers to have invited ICARO. And in the coming minutes, I will tell the story from ICARO, what it does and how it can support research organizations to perform expo controls on a daily basis. So bearing in mind of time and conscious of time, we will respect it as much as possible to allow for questions at the end after this session. So I was introduced as working for IMEC, a semiconductor research institute in Belgium, but IMEC is also one of the founding members of ICARO, and that is actually the reason why I'm giving this this presentation here on behalf of ICARO. I have a bit problems. Sorry for that. The slides. I hope you can still see it. Yes. So about ICARO, ICARO was founded in 2022. It is open for not-for-profit research organizations in the European Union, Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. And these countries are included because of the very close proximity of their expo control systems to the EU1. We have currently members from 15 countries, and we have a very close collaboration also with our US and UK counterparts, because also in these countries, associations are available to help research organizations to comply with expo control regulations. So I'm part of IMEC, but together with the universities of Liège and Leuven in Belgium, and together with the RTO organizations, Fraunhofer Gesellschaft in Germany and TNO in the Netherlands, we are the founding members of ICARO, we are driving together with our members the activities for our members. The role of ICARO is actually specifically to support compliance officers within research organizations, like it was already introduced by Maria and Gonçalo. Because of the, let's say, geopolitical turmoil, expo controls is very high on the agenda lately. But actually, from a regulatory point of view, research organizations or research in general has never been exempted from expo controls. Some parts are, but in general, expo controls was always or should always been a topic for research organizations. But we see in the recent years, of course, that there is much more, it's much more high on the agenda. And therefore, the role of a compliance officer within a research organization became more prominent. But such a person, sometimes a team of persons, is often squeezed between conflicting interests within a research organization. On the one hand, management and business, the researchers who would like to perform their research, but also the regulators who now turn an eye much more towards research organizations as one of the first line of defense actors in the non-proliferation efforts. And that means that a compliance officer needs to work and align, but also to mediate expectations and frustrations from these different sides. So the compliance officer is very central to the success of a compliance program within a research organization. And so that's why we turn as ICARO to these compliance officers to support them, to give them instruments to highlight the benefits of export control awareness, to give them instruments to navigate through the control text, to ask the right questions to researchers, but also to form a community of practitioners who very similarly share questions and can help each other also to learn from each other what are the new trends, what are the new best practices to do. But also, and importantly, also to dare up and to communicate with their regulators, because up to now, research organizations have often been very shy in communicating export control challenges in the research context with regulators. But as Maria clearly indicated, there is a dialogue needed so that both sides understand what are the challenges for export controls in a research context. When you talk about export controls in academia, often you get the first reaction is, why would we be concerned? Export controls doesn't really match with the idea of open science. It doesn't really match with academic freedom. Science is neutral. I mean, everybody down the line can misuse research results. That's not up to the research organization to do something about it, or the individual researcher to do something about it. And often we are performing fundamental research, which is very down the line of where practical applications are there. So why would we actually have to be concerned about export controls? It's a normal reflection, but as was already illustrated by Maria, the fact that you're doing open science, that you practice open science, does not mean you're exempted from an export control perspective. But there is an issue with the export control language because it was created and predominantly intended for industry. So the language is much focused on trading, on the transactional due diligence, about exporting items, end users, end use. So it is a terminology which is not very familiar to the research environment, or at least not to the extent that the traditional research community is working with. So the transactional approach of export controls does not really match with the language of collaborative efforts that often are available in the export control, in the academic community. And the academic setting is also not the easiest one, also from an export control perspective, if you take a look from the perspective of regulators, because there is quite limited top-down steering in academia or in a research context, which means that messages from the top are not always the one command or the one command that is going down. There is a very independent level of researchers who often have a very diverse employment status. So not everybody is doing research on behalf of the university, which from the definition of exporter sometimes make it tricky to make an understanding who is actually exporting here on behalf of whom. So like I said, it's about collaborations, not so much about transactions. And what is very different from the industry is that we are not selling a product once because a customer asks it. Often we have informal and formal iterations of collaborations to come to a certain research output, and that means that it is incrementally evolving into something which might in the end become subject to export controls, but in the beginning it may not. And that iterations approach makes it sometimes difficult to actually assess from what moment on are we talking about a listed item or an item with end use of concern. The publish or perish mentality is also crucial here. There is a strong push to publish and to bring scientific deliverables into the public domain. The open access imperative, which contradicts with the idea that you should maybe first have an export control check before, or that you're getting funding to publish something in the open domain, but still you're required to do some export controls. That is sometimes frustrating from researchers and research organizations to understand. There are ways to work with that, but the initial reaction is, why do you want us to publish and put it in the open access, and on the other hand still want us to perform export controls? That is sometimes difficult to understand. This was already said, but in a different way by Maria. How do you do due diligence? And typically you are screening to the parties which are involved. What are the nature of their activities? Are you working or intending to work with a listed entity? You need to do these due diligence screening. More and more you have to understand who is behind a certain research partner. What is the ownership structure? You have to do your end-use screening. You have to receive information of the type of collaborations that you're doing. What will the partner do with it? And you have to make an assessment with what they state. Is that what you have in mind, or is there a reason to be suspicious about the collaboration? And how can you get more information once this suspicion is there? About the item screening, one of the most tricky things is to link your research result with an item which is on the list, and I will say more about that in a minute. And of course, the destination is also crucial. I mean, are you talking about collaborations inside of the EU? Is there a partner outside of the EU? Are we talking about an item which is going forever to the end user, or is it a temporary export? These elements in your collaboration make or may make a difference in determining whether a license is needed or not. Now, when you have to start about export controls, it's important to understand that if you breach export control regulations when you have shipped or transferred an item which requires a license and you have not done so. So you have not received a license or you have not asked for a license there. That means that it's very often at the end or in execution of a project that you are likely to breach export controls if you did not take that into consideration. But in order to not go there at the end of the stage, at the end of a collaboration, there are certain steps ahead of that where you could have some triggers to check about export controls and to say, or to look systematically, is there an issue here? And that can be at the initial concept or planning step, that can be at the funding stage, that can be at the moment you're hiring researcher or contracting researchers. And then along the way towards the closure of the project, there are multiple steps as well. That is the ideal way, that you have multiple steps in the research life cycle to have an export control check. But of course, your environment is a kind of working against you, because in your research organization, you often have siloed departments linked to technology transfer, compliance, legal, the funding. And these people work in their own environments, and it is not always very easy to have the flow of information necessary to determine in any of these steps whether export controls is needed. And that means that in many cases, still at the end of a project or when items are being delivered, the deliverables of the research, that then it is noticed that there might be export controls in place. And then when you need to apply for a license at that stage, it is often late and delaying the continuation of a project. Just to give a few examples, but we don't have to go into the details, but the diversity of items where research organizations might come into contact with export controls is diverse. So they are both a hardware exporter and a technology exporter, as explained by Maria and Gonzalo before. Typically hardware, we speak about lab equipment, we speak about chemicals, viruses, toxins, alloys, and so on. Information security prototypes, radiation hardened electronics, imagers, sensors, in the near future, qubit devices for quantum computing. These are elements where the hardware export controls come into place. But like it was already said, researchers much more than industry are faced with technology exports as well. Deliverables by funded research with third country partners. When you're making conference material, you're doing performing consultancy services, you're providing technical assistance to some higher risk people coming to your campus. You're talking about publications and so on and so on. All these types and diversity of activities may risk to be subject to export controls if we talk about listed technology. So the diversity for research organizations is often more than for industry, which is of course, given the very limited capabilities that research organizations have, the staff dedicated to compliance, make it a quite challenging environment. This is just to give an example of a practical case, and this is, I think, a typical dual-use export control case where you say, okay, I'm developing a hyperspectral camera on a drone. What you typically have to do then from an export control perspective is take a look at the item. And in this case, the item is the drone and the camera. You have to perform a dual use classification there. You have to collect information about the end use. And, you know, if the stated end use is precision agricultural monitoring, that's fine. But if you expect that this is not logical because the location where you're shipping or transferring this item is actually close to a military base, you can suspect issues whether this is actually not to be used for military base surveillance and so on. And then also on the type of end user, you might have some questions. So it is always reflecting on what is my item and what is actually the involved parties in my collaboration. Are there any reasons to be suspicious? And there are some lists of red flags for any of these steps to actually collect information, whether or not there is a reason to be suspicious. It's important to make a distinction between dual-use items that you use during your research. So you can perfectly import dual-use items, use them in your research, and never re-export them. Then you're not subject to export controls. But in many cases, when we talk about export controls, it is because you produce something during your research that is actually the result of the research. And that result needs to be verified towards export controls, because or you are publishing something, or you are sending a result, a prototype, or you do some spin-off activities based on that research in the future. So it's important there. So we have to make a distinction between what you use during your research and what you actually produce as a result of that. Now, item classification is crucial. It is very tricky, and it is confusing for people who work 1 year in export controls, but also people who work 15 years in export controls. The lists are changing, and it means that your researchers, they will not be an export control classification expert. They need to be familiar to some extent in their research area. What is the technical language, the technical jargon in the control text, and how does it link up with their own research? And that is tricky because the list is not written, the control list is not written for every individual jargon specialism, scientific specialism. That's not possible. So that's, I think, important to realize. So they need to be able to navigate through the control text. There is a specific control structure with some specific language. They need to be aware, and they need to be trained when they are in the area of export controls, and they need to understand where to be suspicious for when they are collaborating or intending to collaborate with a research partner, where there is modifications of their off-the-shelf or previously researched items that it can be used for nefarious objectives like the development of weapons of mass destruction. For compliance officers, they need to be able to link as a general their dual-use risk profile of their research organization. They have to understand, is it one department that is risky for export controls, or are it 5 or 10? They need to be able to make that assessment when they start. And they also should be familiar with how to navigate the control text and how to ask the right questions based on the structure of the control text, ask the researchers to reply to them based on what they need to know from an export control perspective, because the regulators will ask compliance officers to provide the details. And so they need to be the bridge between the regulatory text and the research context of their research organization. A few things we see in common that you should not do when you're doing export control compliance in a research context. You should not pretend that because you're doing research, you're not subject to export controls. That's not the case. There are many illustrations where research organizations are applying for licenses and even are in breach of export controls. So these examples exist. So we should not pretend that research in general is exempted. You should not try from an organization perspective or a compliance officer perspective to convert every researcher into an export control specialist. You will fail. That will not happen. And you should be able to target your efforts towards the more high-risk activities. And that requires some preparation and requires some dual-use risk profiling for your research organization. If you focus on publications and you say export controls only applies to publications, you will also fail, first of all, because there is no practice in the EU to link export controls to publications. There are other activities of research organizations that are more susceptible to export controls and license requirements than publications. You should also not confuse export controls, which is a regulatory requirement, with ethics, because the two are not the same. And you should also not make sure that everybody is compliant with internal procedures and you forget the regulatory environment. You have to comply with the regulation. You don't have to comply with internal measures if the regulation says otherwise. So if you make mistakes in your internal compliance program, the regulation is still there to stay. So that is the first and foremost benchmark of your compliance efforts. And then please approach your regulators when you have doubts. The research community has very strong knowledge about innovative research and emerging technologies, and they should leverage that knowledge to approach regulators and say this is or this is not doable from an export control perspective. And then to end, I think I would like to give a few misconceptions that we hear over and over again. That is that the research community says, well, I do not sell an item, I collaborate. So, I mean, what am I to do with export controls? Like I mentioned, export controls is not about the economics of a transaction. It is about what knowledge, what type of knowledge are you transferring to a counterpart? And if that is subject to export controls because it's listed, then you are in the scope of export controls. The fact that you are sharing knowledge and not creating an item also does not exempt you from export controls because, like Maria explained, technology is an integral part of export controls. The fact that you are not making a commercial product, but you are doing a prototype, so it's a one single item where there is no commercial production in scope, that does not exempt you from export controls because the mass production is not a criterion to be subject to export control. A prototype that works and meets the specs of the dual use list requires you to apply for a license for such a prototype. The fact that you get funding, and this is often conception from your national government or from the EU, and you have a good to go from that perspective, that does not exempt you from being subject to export controls. And so that is important to understand. Because the funding in itself, it is not an exemption. It just you can just pretend you can just continue with the activities, but you are not exempted from applying for a license for the deliverables of a funded project. The fact that your research is novel and you're ahead of the export control items which are listed, that is not always an excuse, not only because the list is dynamic. So we will have in November 2025 a few new controls on cryogenic electronics, quantum computing electronics. So the list is dynamic. And therefore, you have to see the list as both a list of legacy technologies and a list of emerging technologies. So that's important also to understand. Often it is said, yes, every item down the line can be misused. This is not my responsibility. Misuse is a check in export controls, but it does much more than that. And it makes a risk assessment based on the fact who is the party and so on. The fact that theoretically somebody can misuse an item is not an issue from the list. Then I know my research partners, I collaborate with them a lot. So I have no idea, I have a good idea of what I will do with that knowledge. That is also something that you should not use as an excuse because trust is no criterion to be exempted from export controls. And that also needs to be very clear. Ethical reflections, I mentioned it already, and so it's a requirement. Ethical reflections can take a part whether or not you want to collaborate despite or regardless of export controls, but you are not using that as an excuse. The fact that my item is free and open source is also not a reason to be exempted because export controls may apply nonetheless. The fact that our compliance team knows the list and they will approach you when they are impacted, when you're impacted, that is also not an excuse. You as a researcher and your research organization have to take this responsibility seriously. So that is something that you have to take into consideration. Sometimes it is a confusion. The Chinese, the US colleagues, research colleagues can collaborate on a certain topic. Why am I constrained within the EU? Well, yes, there are different jurisdictions in export controls, and these jurisdictions are not identical. And so the reasons why sometimes in the US more fundamental research is exempted in comparison to the EU, that is a reality that is confusing for researchers, but it is a legal reality you cannot deviate from. And then lastly, item classification, yes, from a research perspective is difficult. So why can't we just everything calling basic scientific research in a research context? Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that because in the EU, the basic scientific research decontrol is quite limited. So ICARO, and there's my last slide, ICARO can support research organizations in understanding the list, in improving and reviewing internal compliance programs, briefing you on the impact of US export controls on European research organizations, to have sharing of best practices and practical cases, so learning from your peers, drafting position papers, and be heard as a community with similar concerns. I think it's a very important thing, because we know that there are diverging implementations across the EU, because regulators, as Maria explained, have some autonomy to some implementation additions. That is a reality, and by exchanging practices and by bringing to a certain degree of harmonization to that, I think that is very important to improve the level playing field also in the EU. So ICARO can support there, and if you have questions, please reach out to ICARO or to me for a follow-up discussion there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johan. Can you hear me right? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much to all of our speakers for this excellent presentation. Now we have 15 minutes, well, 10 minutes, because then we have a closing remarks from George, and we have some questions, some interactions in our Zoom, in our live Zoom. I would like to invite all the participants to make more questions, but I think we have enough to this 10 minutes that we have. But of course, you can always raise some questions, and then we will provide them to our speakers. I would like to remind that these questions were made through the session, so probably some of them were already answered, but I think it's a good opportunity to recall some topics. So I will begin to provide you that questions, so the interactions. First of all, I think it's important to notice that we have the pleasure to have one of our colleagues, EN colleagues from Italy, Marco Sardo, which was interacting with George. We were recently together, so it's important to know that this content is useful to all the EN network, and to see our colleagues here. I have here, I will start with the first question. It's from Marta Abrantes. She made two questions. So the first one is, does export also includes non-commercial interactions? Is the question. And then she made another one, which is open access papers seem to be exempted from export control, but they are also appear on possible control items as mentioned by the last speaker. Could you clarify it? So I'll pass to Johan or Maria. I don't know, Johan, if you would start to answer this question. The first one, if it's a non-commercial interaction, are included. I think you made some good examples in this one of your last slides about this, and the other one is about open access papers, if they are an exempt from export controls.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, very good question. So I think the first one on the non-commercial transactions, yeah, like I mentioned, the fact that nobody pays for your dual use items and you're still sending them, it does not exempt you from export controls. So that's, I think, very clear. The fact sometimes it is asked, well, if I put my dual use laboratory equipment on the parking lot of my company or research organization and somebody picks it up, there's no export taking place. Well, this is not the case. So it's important that you make a distinction between, let's say, the monetary aspect of the transaction or the type of transaction and the item. If the item is listed, you have to take a look at the type of activity. So it is true, if you are having a listed item and you're transferring from the university in Belgium to another university in Belgium, there is no export. So the dual use item remains a dual use item, but there is no export license needed because the transaction is not covered by the dual use regulation. There you can make the distinction and between the item and the type of activity. But the fact that there is money or no money involved, yes, that is another reason to be not subject to export controls. The open access, it is very important and it's tricky. First of all, I think it is important to classify the item first. So if you are talking about a publication which is not specific enough for the development of an item, like Maria has described, and you're putting that in an open access, there is no problem because the publication in the first place was not even subject to export controls. But if it would be, and we still have to look for good examples because we in the EU lack practical examples on the issue of publications, but the fact that there is a push towards open access does not exempt you from export controls. If the publication is specific enough, in theory, you should apply for a license before you enter it into open access. Of course, we can talk a lot about whether it makes sense to get a license for something that is to be in the open and in the open anyway, but that is something that the export control community is working on. But the push for open access is not an exemption of export controls. But everything what is already in the public domain, and I think that's what Maria highlighted, what is already in the public domain, you can reuse because export controls doesn't make sense anymore for something that has been already entered into the public domain. But you can ask yourself, the one put it in the public domain 1 year, 2 years ago, probably breached export controls at that stage.
Thank you. I don't know if I think it was clear in this topic. Probably we can pass to another question because we have some of them. Related with conference, conference is example given. Does this mean prior screening of publication, example in drones related publication for scientific publication authorization? So I don't know if this was clear, this question. Related with the conference example that was given, I think this was during the presentation of Maria. If this mean a prior screening of publication. I don't know if you understand this question, Maria.
Well, I think I will. I don't, but as far as I understand, there is here a sort of confusion between the publication and the conference. When the people speak at the conference and they are explaining the fundamentals of their technology research on dual-use items and the necessary information, when what they are doing is transferring information. Let's make it an example. It's like they are exporting know-how through orally. If I go to a conference in, for instance, Malaysia, and I explain at that conference how my project built a specific drone to match this criteria or to overcome the wind speed limit, what I'm doing is exporting my know-how. And this exporting orally is subject to an export license. It has nothing to do with publication. It's not the same. As far as I don't see the relation, so that's how I understood the question.
Yes, I think it meant to the scientific publication authorization. So it was clear your answer. So another question is from Paulo. If a research group is developing like a laser system that could be used in both medical and targeting application, what steps should be taken before sharing design data with a foreign collaborator? I don't know who can ask this more practical question, and in 3 minutes, just for us to close. I don't know, Johan, if you have the privilege to have you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, lasers is a good example. I mean, there is a substantial set of lasers which are controlled on the dual-use list. So I think the first assessment that should be done is the laser that we're talking about. Is it meeting the technical parameters in the laser section of the dual-use list? If that is the case, you have to look at the specific technical description of that laser and see if there are certain exemptions for the hardware. And sometimes medical applications, but also automotive or other types of applications can be exempted. So if you say, look, my first intent design for this laser is medical, and this is how I try to, let's say, prototype it, I think you have reasons to use that exemption. Of course, if you say, well, I have no application in mind and this is multi-purpose, everybody later down the line can use this for whatever application they have, then you probably cannot use that exemption. But if you have done these steps and it's a controlled laser, and then you have to see if you have to apply for a license because the counterpart is outside of the EU, and you have to get them a declaration on the end use that they will do. And based on that, you will go to your authority and say, look, I have a license application. This is the end use. Are you comfortable with granting the license, or would you not grant the license? And that's the procedure that needs to happen. So everything starts with the laser and then goes to the involved party and end use of your collaboration.
Thank you, Johan. I think we had more questions, but I think the time is going to we are in the end of our session. So before I would like to compliment our three guests in this webinar. Thank you so much for your presentation. Before passing the word to George to make his final remarks, I'd like to say to you, George, that we have here another colleague from AEN, Daniela Sena, which we will be together with her very soon. It's not only a AEN colleague, but a sector group, aerospace and defense colleague. So I would like to pass you with this information. We have more questions coming, but our speakers provide the contacts in this presentation, and you can revisit this video in the IAPMEI YouTube channel anytime. So please feel free to contact them to make your doubts clear. So George, I will pass you the word to final remarks.
Thank you to our guests, thank you to everyone who attended. And I think after this webinar, all of you can answer the questions, what are export control, I think. And I think you agree with me, these controls are essential to maintain national security, foreign policy objectives, human rights, economic competitiveness, and to help prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So this is a strategic necessary for any company involved in the international trade, I think. Thank you very much for everyone. We'll keep in touch and prepare more webinars of these topics. Bye for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.